This is a garlic. Now, there is an old tradition, of course, that garlic is going to save you from werewolves. And if I were an Australian premier like Anastasia Palaszczuk, I'd say, look, see, it works. It works. I've kept garlic all my life. Never once seen a werewolf. And it's the same logic with these lockdowns of half the country. See, they work. I mean, look at the cities now that have been locked down. Perth, no new infections. Alice Springs, no new infections. Townsville, Gold Coast, no new infections. Darwin, just 1. Brisbane, just 2. The only worry, of course, still Sydney, 24 cases today. But for the rest, obviously, lockdowns work. But if you believe that, of course, then you'd also believe that this garlic works too, because obviously it stopped werewolves from tearing me to pieces. But in fact, in most of those cities, it's been mostly too soon to pick up infections that people got after the lockdown was imposed, when the lockdown was supposedly then going to stop them from moving around. And the vast majority of new infections since the lockdowns have been of people already found by contact tracers and put in isolation, like the new infection in Darwin today. These people were already safely in isolation. The case in Sydney, yes, it is slightly different, but even there, you may well doubt the pain of the lockdown was worth the gain, and maybe contact tracers should just be given more help and more time to trace and isolate people. But we still have the health fascists of this country whipping up their hysteria and demanding even more control over your lives. Today, our 2 worst premiers, the ones who've run the quarantine hotels with the worst records of virus breakdowns, the ones most prone to lockdowns, they're saying, let's now make it even harder for Australians. Let's make it even harder for Australians trying to come home. And of course, then on Australians wanting permission to travel, because they'd have to then come home too. Let's cut the cap on people returning. Let's slash the number even more that will allow to come home.
My view is that it is better to lock some people out than to lock everyone down. That is my view.
So today I've written to reduce our caps by 50%.
No, it certainly needs to be more than 50% in my judgment. Well, I've spoken about 75, 80%.
So these premiers want you to give up your freedoms, in this case to travel, or to come home, to make their lives easier, because they can't trust themselves to run things like quarantine centres with some competence. I was joined earlier by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell, and I asked him whether these limits that we now have on people returning will now be lowered even more.
I think so, don't you? I mean, we've had a week of lockdowns. We know Scott Morrison is pretty populist. We know that he likes to come out of National Cabinet with consensus. I don't think Andrews and Palaszczuk will get what they want, but perhaps particularly in Andrews' case, it's an ambit claim, but they'll get something on that front. And maybe that's fair enough, maybe it's not, but it doesn't look fair enough when you look at the fact that so many state government stuff-ups have led to these outbreaks. Not the number of people going into the quarantine facilities. Things like not having an aircrew driver vaccinated and perhaps not even masked. A student nurse in Sydney, not vaccinated. A receptionist near the COVID ward in a Queensland hospital, not vaccinated. A worker from Bendigo put in the same hotel as put in a COVID hotel with international travellers before he goes to a mine in the NT. All this sort of stuff. State government faults of state government policy, and yet they get to argue to the federal government that they should cut the amount of people coming here. Well, I don't think we should, but I think that's what you're going to see tomorrow. The test will be for Morrison to make it just a 10 or 15% drop off, not the huge numbers that Dan Andrews and Anastasia Palaszczuk are talking about.
This is just insane, isn't it? I mean, you would think that after a year and a half of trying to get it right, we should be nearly there with a foolproof sort of system, and yet we're being even tougher on Australians coming back. And of course, the corollary of that is that Australians leaving, it's going to be much harder to leave, because otherwise, how are you going to come back? This is just absolutely insane.
Well, we just got to get vaccinated. It's as simple as that. And, you know, I think the federal government's made a few stuff-ups there. I think they've had bad advice. It's my indication from Brendan Murphy. He put all the eggs in one basket of AstraZeneca and the local manufacturer. And, you know, they spend a lot of time on diplomacy. We were just at the G7, Scott Morrison, talking to the US and UK leaders and getting on famously. I know that other countries have had more deaths and had a need for vaccines, but you know, maybe Anthony Albanese's got a point when he said you just have one job or two jobs. Every concentration of effort had to be into that. And I don't see it. I don't see the urgency. I'm told from people within there's not that sort of urgency. They spin a lot about war footing and all that. Once we get through all that, then we can have the debate about what's open and what's not. And I know you have a more liberal view and approach to this, and we may well end up there. But once we're vaccinated, there won't be any excuses anymore, because most of us will be a lot more protected against the virus. And that's reality. That's fact. That's borne out by everything you see. And then it stops becoming about cases. Yeah, there's still some concerns about long COVID, but it just becomes about a small number of deaths. And we can just get on with whatever our lives will be. They won't be back to normal, but they'll be a hell of a lot more normal than they are now.
Yeah, well, I just query whether we all need to get vaccinated, given that, you know, the very young, I don't think would probably need to get vaccinated. It might be nice that they do. But when you've got even the Queensland Chief Health Officer saying that the risk from the vaccine is actually greater than from the virus, and I think the virus is something that the young can live with. I think there's a lot of scaremongering here. Protect the vulnerable, protect the old, but otherwise, you know, open up like we're seeing in other countries overseas. But listen, about this National Cabinet meeting, Prime Ministers and the Prime Minister and the Premiers getting together, let's agree on how to fight this virus, this travel restriction new proposal is going to go before the National Cabinet. It seems this whole National Cabinet idea, Andrew, is just a joke, because we've got premiers like Palaszczuk instead using the Prime Minister as a punching bag to, as you suggest, deflect blame from their own failures.
Well, the old COAG system's never worked, has it? I don't think it's so black and white that the whole thing's been useless, but gee, it has its challenges, and the states have a lot of the powers, and the feds have been happy not to do a regional quarantine facility and all this sort of thing, so it does look a bit shambolic. Scott Morrison's just got to front foot things a bit more, and he's got to bring them with him a bit more, and he's just got to keep getting up and fighting every day. And, you know, that's what this is. The pandemic's a fight. Policy around it is a fight. Changing public opinion around it is a fight. He is a fighter. He just has to get up and do it every day.
Yeah, but when you got the Queensland Premier being so nakedly political about this, this is just really appalling behaviour from her. The Victorian Premier, though, much as I've criticised him in the past, and he deserved it, did have one good idea today, one that I actually suggested months ago, but he buried in it a bad idea. It was about what we should aim for before we could relax our restrictions. Here he is.
I hope, though, by the time that's ready, that we're in a very different set of circumstances anyway. We've got 70, 80, whatever the percentage is, of the community have had the jab. Or to put it another way, everyone who wants to be vaccinated has been given an opportunity to do that. And then it's on them if they don't choose to get vaccinated. But we wouldn't be having lockdowns to protect people who weren't prepared to protect themselves.
Now, the bad idea there is the one I suggested to you before, Andrew, that we need to vaccinate more than 80% of Australians. I don't think that is necessary. Now, other countries got there and they're opening up. Makes little sense to vaccinate the young. But the idea here of saying, listen, it is on you. When we get to the point where we've offered you the vaccine and you've either taken it or you've refused it, well, that's fine. But the travel ban stop and the rest of us get on with our lives.
Yes. Yes. And look, the feds indicate to me they'll do the advertising soon, and they didn't do it because they didn't have the supply before. But Morrison needs to talk more like this and less negative about other countries are having outbreaks still and they're all vaccinated. We need to get everyone vaccinated because you're just in a lot better position if you are. Now, I think we'll end up at 70% of eligible Australians, and hopefully, I actually think you should vaccinate young people because there's evidence long COVID can last for months or years. So you're not on a ventilator, you're not dying, but you just have very bad effects. So I think we can get to 70%, and I would make 70% not the mark, because like you, Andrew, I think 80% is completely unrealistic. And so you don't want to put some figure there that you're not going to reach. You want to, well, maybe they're saying 80, and when they get to 70, they'll make a call on that. But I think you're spot on to say this is the ultimatum, in a sense, to give to people. You know, you'll have better rights and you'll be in a better position if you get vaccinated.
Yeah, I'm certainly not saying don't vaccinate the young. I'm saying don't keep lockdowns and all that while we wait for the young who may or may not want to get vaccinated. I don't know that that is necessary, because the proportional risk is not in the favour of lockdowns instead of that. So that's just my point of view, but I've been told I've been mean and hard and all that before, so there you go. Andrew Clennell, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, mate.